podcast exploring the vast worlds of He-Man and She-Ra. Join Sean Scavarna and Matthew Duke as they discuss the history and mystery of Eternia and Etheria, diving deep into all incarnations of Masters of the Universe.
Hey, you know who's back? It's the Legends of Grayskull podcast. Now that you know, let's go. Get ready for the show. It's the Legends of Grayskull podcast. Sit back and enjoy the ride. Right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Legends of Grayskull Reviews. Mike Young Productions, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. This is episode 0. I am Matthew Duch, here with Curtis Ackerman. Curtis, how are we doing today?
We are doing most excellent. Ready to kick off this amazing thing.
Let's do it. So for those of you who don't know what we're doing, this is a mini-series entirely devoted to the Mike Young Productions He-Man the Masters of the Universe cartoon series. This series ran for 2 seasons on Cartoon Network with a total of 39 episodes, and we are going to go through this episode by episode and give you our thoughts on them. So today we are just going to take a look at the concept. So Curtis, why don't you kick us off? When did you first view the 2000X series and what attracted you to it?
So I think I talked about this just recently, kind of, but maybe not as much in detail. So I didn't know about the 2000X series when it was happening. I actually didn't find out about it till about, I guess it was about 10 years ago. And I was out of toy collecting. I hadn't collected toys in a while. I had been picking up a few like DC statues here and there, the Kotobukiya ones that are, reasonably priced and look nice. But I really hadn't done a whole lot of action figure collecting since I was younger. And I picked up some, I was picking up some vintage He-Man at a flea market. And as I was picking those up, I came across a classics version of Stratos, which was one of my favorite characters growing up. And I was like, what is this thing? Because I'd never seen anything in that scale before. Motu, and I was like, this thing is amazing. And the guy told me that, about the classics line and all this and that. And he then encouraged me to get involved in some Motu Facebook groups, which is another thing that I had never been into before. I didn't even know it was a thing, right. That they had these like fan groups for different things. So got involved in a couple of those, found a few podcasts that I started listening to. And somewhere through that process, I found out about the MYP. And I think before I found out about MYP, the way that I came across it was I read the Icons of Evil comic books first. And I thought those were absolutely amazing. Like the Trapjaw Icons of Evil comic book, that was to this day is the best comic book I've ever read in my life. Like I absolutely love it. So when I got done with those, I was kind of disappointed that that's all there was, because it was just like 4 issues. And then I found out as I was kind of talking to some friends that there was this whole MYP series. It's not the exact same thing, but it's kind of in that same time period, and they were, same kind of people and stuff.
Well, it's the same universe. The Icons of Evil were created by MV Creations, who were doing the comics, tying in with the whole 2000X MYP everything. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there's like they don't reference the stuff in the comic books in the show or vice versa, but it is like the same kind of universe is my understanding.
Well,
do you agree or no?
They don't reference the comics in the show, but the comics definitely reference the show in the comics. Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
No, they are the same universe. They're
gotcha.
Just the comics. This could be a whole nother episode, but basically the MV Creations comics had to follow everything that MYP set up. They couldn't deviate, but MYP didn't have to follow anything the comics did.
Okay.
So, but that just basically the priority. So for Mattel, toys took top, MYP had the second, and then MVC could do something in the leftover space. But they're definitely supposed to be the same universe.
Yeah, so for me, it's a little bit unique because I was actually introduced to classics figures before I was introduced to the 2000X figures.
Yep.
Which means that by the time, I was already well into classics before I even saw my first 2000X figure, which makes me not really like the 2000X figures. I think they're pretty crappy, but that's because I'm comparing them to classics. For people that kind of had that as they were growing through that, probably thought they were awesome. But I don't have that same love for those figures. But anyway, I jumped from the comics to the series. I'm excited to do this because when I was watching the series, I mean, it was already, 12 years after the fact. So I didn't have anybody to talk to about it because I'm watching it well later. So this will be fun to actually have somebody to talk to about the episodes as we're going through it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. So I was day and date for the MYP series. I remember the San Diego Comic-Con where they showed off the Four Horsemen 2-ups for the toys. And I was following along religiously. So the toys were announced. Then they announced that they were going to do a movie special on Cartoon Network's Cartoon Theater, and that was supposed to be all it was. So basically, what we got as the beginning was supposed to be it when it was first announced. But then even before the beginning aired, they had already upped it to a full season order, 26 episodes.
Gotcha.
I remember when the first trailer came out for the MYP series, and we basically broke He-Man.org on that day. That's when I learned how to install a QuickTime player on my computer so that I could play internet videos because I'd never messed with much. Like He-Man was my introduction to the internet between finding He-Man.org and all this stuff. The old Busted Tunes episode review site, like.
See, and by the time I found He-Man.org, it was pretty much, wrapping up. Like I was not in the forums or any of that kind of stuff, so I missed all of that.
Yeah, see that. I mean, that was at the forums. That was the place to discuss. Like we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have the messenger and the video chats and all this. Like, so yeah, the message boards were hot, and I remember the beginning watching that when it still premiered on Cartoon Network's Cartoon Theater. They played the whole first 3 episodes I did together into a movie. I remember I had to work that night, so I couldn't watch it as it was premiering, but I set the VCR to record. And I remember I just watched it started, and I was able to watch basically that little pan down to Eternia and Randor and his crew walking into the Hall of Wisdom, and then I had to go to work. So I'm like, if I keep watching, I'm going to be late for work because I'm just going to watch the whole thing. But I remember coming home after work and rewinding that VHS tape and just loving the hell out of it. And I was in for the whole thing. So I'm excited to go through there. I'm not saying every episode is a winner, but going from vintage to New Adventures to this felt like coming home.
I think it's good to kind of talk about, before we actually get into the individual episodes, because I don't know that it'll come up naturally during that. But when you say you were in for the whole thing, I wasn't there for the time, but I hear that was not an easy thing to do because they were switching time slots. They were switching,
you had
days of the week, and they did a lot of stuff that made it to where I'm surprised the series even lasted as long as it did. So yeah, maybe if you lived through that, if you kind of talk a little bit to that. Quick.
I mean, it definitely wasn't easy because it started off. Well, it had the premiere, and then it started off on the Toonami block, and that was Friday nights, and then They switched it to Saturday mornings for a while. They switched it to Thursday evenings. Like, it was always being moved around. And it's kind of in that era where Cartoon Network seemed to do that to stuff that wasn't their own property, like
Mhm.
something that they didn't have owning in. They would just move it around a lot without notice. So I definitely had to be up on it, and they would take these weird hiatuses. One of the craziest thing they did. So, as you know, because you watched the series,
Mhm.
season one starts with the beginning and it ends with Council of Evil part 1 and 2. Cartoon Network did not air Council of Evil part 1 and 2 during the first season of He-Man.
Hmm.
Because it ended on a cliffhanger, they refused to air it until the beginning of season 2.
Interesting.
So we left, I can't even remember off the top of my head what the last episode is before that. But yeah, it's decisions like that. Like the whole point of a cliffhanger is to get people hooked for season 2. So
Yeah.
they had the 26 episodes. Cartoon Network aired 24 and then waited for the next 13 to be completed before airing the 2 parts left of season 1.
Yeah.
Like, it's stuff like that just like, what are you guys doing?
Well, and I think it's interesting because, I mean, even though I didn't know of I didn't know of this and I wasn't plugged into like the forums or He-Man.org or whatever, but I had cable at the time. Like I had,
Yeah.
this is before like the days of being able to stream stuff without commercials or, whatever. So like if this was advertised, I never saw it,
It was,
because I didn't know anything about it. So I think, between jumping around from time slot to time slot, day to day, and I feel like until probably just recently, like within the last couple of years, they always fall into this pattern of trying to make these things directed towards kids because they think that the thing
yes.
like a show should sell a toy.
Yep.
And we want the kids to buy the toy, so we're going to direct the advertising and the show towards kids. And I think until just recently, they've kind of done that pattern or fallen into that pattern without realizing that some of us adults actually do like this stuff. And we are the ones buying the toys and we're the ones watching this stuff. And they've never really marketed or, made these things with us in mind. It's always been towards a younger generation. So yeah, I just think that's interesting.
That's absolutely correct. And looping back real quick, so season 1 for Cartoon Network ended with Separation, which is a good episode, but it's not a season finale. It's not something
Right.
that's like, oh man, I can't wait till next season. It's just kind of like it ends. And to your point, it was promoted, but it was only promoted on Cartoon Network. So if you weren't watching Cartoon Network already, you're not getting the ads for He-Man. So it's, it's one of those things. And the age that most of us were. So that's probably something good to point. So 2002, I'm a junior in high school when this premieres.
I just graduated college.
Yeah, you were 20 years out of college. You had 5 grown children, and
Yeah,
so,
I mean, the only thing I was
you're not
watching,
probably watching Cartoon Network,
I was, but the only thing I was watching was like the Adult Swim, like nighttime stuff,
Right.
and they definitely
They
did
were-
not advertise on there.
No, because
those
that's
are
when
different. Yeah.
the switch flips. You got all the adults floating in the pool, and yeah, it's.
But had they even thrown one commercial out there for it, I would have been like, oh shoot, there's a He-Man cartoon. Like I would have been in.
Your whole life could have changed.
Correct. By them airing one commercial during, one of those shows, during Aqua Teen Hunger Force or, whatever else.
So I was all in. But yeah, it took work. I had to know when it was coming on. I had to, like I said, at that time I even had the job and everything else. So like I was recording. no idea whatever happened. But at one point, I had the whole series recorded on VHS because I never knew if I was going to make it or not, you know.
Mhm.
And at the same time, those figures coming out, they looped in the Four Horsemen, going from vintage New Adventures to those 2000X figures. Yeah, I was blown away. I'm like, yeah, these are the figures I always wanted. I would come to find out years later that the figures I always wanted were classics, but at the
Right.
time, you know, and same thing there. I'm buying every figure I can find, which was not easy. They had horrible distribution, horrible case ratios. They pumped He-Man and Skeletor endlessly, and
With a million variants.
a million variants.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard, but like they had full waves and half waves. So wave 1 was 3 heroes and 3 villains.
Mhm.
Wave 2 would just be 3 heroes.
Mm.
Then wave 3 would be 3 heroes and 3 villains again. And then wave 4 would be just 3 heroes. They would never do an all villains wave. They decided kids want heroes and not villains.
And that's just
So
wrong because in Motu, the villains are always better.
exactly. But yeah, so then you had this odd ratio. By wave 2, you got six heroes versus 3 villains, and you have 9
Yeah.
heroes versus 12 villain or 6 villains. And it's like, but I bought them. I bought all the variants. I bought everything just because, like I've said on our last regular episode, I want to show that there's a market for He-Man comics. I wanted to show them that there was a market for He-Man toys. So
Yeah.
I bought at least one of everything, all the variants, everything, just to show, you know, I bought the comics, I bought all the variant covers to the comics, I watched every episode I could. Like this was our chance, you know, to show that that He-Man could thrive again. And by all accounts, it was a hit. It just wasn't a hit with the people that Mattel wanted and thought they needed it to be, and
Mhm.
that was the kids.
Yeah, I don't know that even if I would have known about it at the time that I would have been into the toys because
I
I just think that the articulation, I don't know, they just the harder plastic of it just not. I don't know that it would have been up my alley. But I tell you what, I would have been all in on is those Stactions.
Mhm.
I would have bought the heck out of those things. You know, unfortunately, I didn't know about those until well after the fact, to where they're like skyrocketed in price, and
Yep.
you know, you can't find a Jitsu without a broken ponytail and you know, all this
Well,
other stuff.
You could rarely find a Jitsu without a broken ponytail when they were case fresh.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was a magical time. It was the reemergence. It was, you know, and it's funny too because when you look in the grand scheme of things,
Mhm.
like, you know, original He-Man stopped airing in 87. New Adventures aired from 89 to 90, you know. So really you're talking about 10 years gap in there. But
Yeah.
we all felt like, you know, in the general popular, like He-Man was dead. There's no bringing him back. He's just one of those bygone 80s relics, you know. So like this felt like our chance to bring him back. And, you know, it felt like a success. You go on He-Man.org, the message boards were a buzz. New members joining every day. Toy Fair, the famous toy magazine, which I love to this day. You know, the Masters figures were constantly winning Figure of the Year and honorable mentions. And
Mhm.
Castle Grayskull won the best play set. And like, even they, you know, especially there, because I started reading Toy Fair. I remember finding issue 1 of Toy Fair. And like that was my monthly magazine rack purchase, and they were always making jokes. Like He-Man was just the butt of jokes in that until 2000X came out, and then all of a sudden it's like they're like, oh, you know, He-Man's back. This property has some legs still.
Mhm.
And that, you know, after doing New Adventures, coming back to Eternia, getting back to more classic designs, I think they could have gone a little bit more classic, but you know, 2020 hindsight. but it felt like it was a great time in the community, and it felt like a huge win. And then to find out afterwards, like you said, that basically Mattel viewed it as a failure because 8-year-olds weren't buying the toys, even though they were selling out everywhere, minus the endless wave of variants where, you know, I was a simple collector. I bought everything, but there were some collectors that were like, I can't do the variants. I'll do all the unique figures, but I can't do the variants. And so, you know, I don't know. It gets a lot of trash talking about it, the whole era, especially by Mattel, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
And so
I've never really heard anything bad about it. I mean, definitely not anywhere near like New Adventures.
Well,
Like,
even when we got into allegedly, when we got into classics, you know, they snuck that 2000X head in with the Whiplash figure in classics. And allegedly after that, there was a ban on Mattel on any more of those nods for a while because they viewed that as a failure. And they thought if they brought it back with this line, that classics would be a failure. I don't know how much of that is true. The guy who's responsible for those quotes has been known to be kind of shady when it comes to quotes. So
yeah, I mean that Whiplash head was sold in a heads pack.
No,
yeah.
Whiplash came with the figure. Clawful. So Whiplash was the first figure to come with a 2000X head.
Okay.
And so then everybody was like, well, why aren't we getting the 2000X heads with all these other? Because then Clawful came out and Grizzlor and like all these other figures where we're like, hey, we'd really like a 2000X head. And that's when the brand manager came out and was like, oh, no, there's a ban on that. And it stayed that way for a few years. And then supposedly the ban was lifted. And that's when they came out with the heads pack to get some of those figures that had come out in the interim that really could benefit from a 2000X.
Yeah. So the heads pack had a different Cyclone, Buzz Off, the Clawful, Roboto, and then your horse dude.
Yeah,
squirt guy. and Grizzlor, but I don't count Grizzlor because he's She-Ra. So
he's pretty.
That is a great head. I actually love all of those heads, and I used I think every single one of them on my classics. So
no, I love it, and we'll definitely get into more of the redesigns as we're getting to the people's episodes and everything. So
cool.
But yeah, I'm excited. I'm hoping this is going to shed some positive light on the series. It is now streaming on Amazon Prime, seasons 1 and 2. So you guys can follow along with us and enjoy.
They do have some weird numbering, just so everybody knows. Like I went to go start episode 1 last night, and it said like episode 1 part 2, but it was actually part 1, and then part 2 actually says part 1 on it. So if you just follow in order the way that they've got them listed, it works. But yeah, just don't pay attention to what it says. Just go start from the top down.
Fair enough. All right. Anything else you want to say before we wrap this one up?
No, I'm just excited that you asked me to do this and not New Adventures because I couldn't have made it.
That'll be the next one. All 116 New Adventures episodes. That'll be our next miniseries.
I'd rather do episode by episode of the She-Ra Princess of Power. So
that's another great one.
Yeah,
it's 93 episodes there. All right, guys, make sure you go watch the beginning part 1. Stay tuned for our mini-series episode 1 dropping soon. And as always, click those buttons down below. It helps us share this with some friends that you think would enjoy it. And until next time, enjoy watching the beginning part 1.
Oh, come on.